Hello, friends, and welcome to the October 4th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in the process. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Engagement Director, and today's episode is brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas and Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. So we are now 2 weeks into the Texas Legislature's third special session. The last 3 weeks, we focused on three primary issues the Texas Legislature is considering during this session, as well as the federal Build Back Better proposals. I'd encourage you to go check out that content from previous weeks. And we'll be joined later in this program by Advocacy Director Josh Houston for a legislative update. There's a lot going on even as we are recording today. But today, we're going to turn our attention to another important topic, the sunset process for the Public Utility Commission, a process that is always important, but I think it's even more in the spotlight. I know it's even more in the spotlight this year because of the failures of the grid during the winter storm, during the snowpocalypse earlier this year. So here with us for that conversation is a good friend of the program, Adrian Shelley, Director of Public Citizen. Adrian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you all for attending. I haven't done a weekly witness in a while here, and so I really appreciate the opportunity to come back. I'm sorry that we can't do it in person in y'all's beautiful building here, not too far from my own office, but I know that day will come in the future. I always appreciate the opportunity to come see Texas Impact. I think the first Texas Impact meeting I attended was probably close to 30 years ago. I was under 10 years old at that point, was attending when my dad was a board member of the organization back in the 90s. So always good to come back around to Texas Impact, and we'll look forward to doing so in person in the future. But for now, we're going to talk about what we can do virtually on the Public Utility Commission. And, a lot of us out there across Texas have probably learned a whole lot more about the Public Utility Commission, or maybe about ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. Maybe have learned a whole lot more about those agencies than you ever thought that you wanted or needed to know because of what happened in February with Winter Storm Uri and the energy crisis that it precipitated. Electricity, when it's functioning well, is meant to be essentially invisible, right? You plug your appliance into the wall and it works, and you don't give it a second thought, right? And the same thing, unfortunately, can probably be said about electricity policy. It is generally invisible to most people, from average Texans, even all the way up to lawmakers. It's a very technical and kind of a niche subject, and it's something that most people don't really think about or care to think about when it is functioning well. But when the lights start to go off, when the grid starts to fail, suddenly we all care. We all become experts very quickly. So if you know what the Public Utility Commission is, if you know what ERCOT and the Texas grid are, it's probably because of how you were impacted back in February during Winter Storm Uri. We have about 26 million, they call them customers, served by the Texas grid. It's about 90% of the state. And around 70% of those customers, at least among the residential ones, lost power in February for an average of about 42 hours. So almost 2 days that about 70% of us in Texas lost power. Devastating consequences for the state. You all probably have heard the statistics, 211 deaths according to the Department of State Health, and hundreds of billions, perhaps 150, maybe even $200 billion in cost across the state, which would make it the most expensive natural disaster in Texas history. So that happened in February, and we are still recovering from that. The Public Utility Commission is undertaking a wholesale redesign of the electricity market right now. This is going on fairly out of the public eye at the Public Utility Commission. Unfortunately, this is not a body that has historically considered much of a role for the electricity consumer, the end user. It's kind of an insider game. It's mostly, electricity generators, wind farms, natural gas plants, those sorts of things, and electricity sellers, the companies that we interact with, in my case, Green Mountain Energy, right, or Reliant, a retailer, right? So the Public Utility Commission really hasn't contemplated much of a role for the public, and the market redesign that's going on right now has happened in that kind of traditional way. They ask for comments through a fairly technical process that's been in place at the PUC for a long time. They open a docket. The docket is given a number, and then there are filings through an now entirely virtual system through which participants can see all of the filings from everybody else. And the PUC has meetings. They are generally not open public meetings, but it has everything from commission meetings where they make decisions to working groups to technical meetings. Again, mostly being participated in by technical market participants, not customers, right? So we've tried to change that a little bit. Public Citizen, Texas Impact, the Energy Foundation, a lot of the advocates out there who care about your rights to affordable, reliable, resilient energy have been lobbying the PUC during this market redesign process to try to get more opportunity for public involvement. We'd like the commission to hold public working groups at which there are opportunities for public comment. We'd like all of the materials that are created to be, readily publicly accessible in plain English or plain Spanish, if that's what you require. We've made a lot of recommendations for what the PUC could be doing for this market redesign process to be happening with more public input. But it's proceeding very quickly. The first draft rules are going to come out in just the next couple of days here. The PUC initially said it would be done with that market redesign by the end of the year. It's looking now like it might be a little bit longer than that. But considering that we are doing an overhaul of the entire electricity market in Texas, it's pretty amazing that the whole thing is happening in just a couple of months without a whole lot of public input. So that's going on right now. And we're not going to get into the technical aspects of the energy market redesign, but I will just tell you a couple of general principles very quickly. First of all, you got to think about energy markets as an equation. And if you can think back to economics, it's a supply and demand equation. You've got supply on one side, you've got demand on the other side. If we could make the PUC do one thing differently, it would be to consider the demand side of the equation now. Everything from how efficient air conditioners are in homes to how easy is it to connect a solar panel on my home into the grid, to how much authority does my retail electric provider have to dial down my thermostat during peak uses so that I'm not using as much energy when energy is in high demand. Those are all what we would call demand side strategies. You can also think of those as local strategies, strategies on your end of the electricity equation. So that's a kind of our general principle for what the market redesign should be looking at. But it's not. It's mostly looking at the supply side of things. What type of energy are we producing? And for a lot of people in Texas, that's how much fossil fuels are we producing? How much clean energy are we producing? Obviously, we want more clean energy because it's cheaper, it's safer, it's healthier, it's better for all of us. But there is this major question right now about what is called dispatchability. How quickly and effectively and easily can we get the energy when it is needed, right? If the wind isn't blowing, you don't get energy from a wind turbine, right? If a gas plant isn't on, you can't get energy from it right away. You've at least got to turn it on. And that takes a little bit of time, right? So those are questions of dispatchability. Now, it might not surprise you to hear that a lot of the lawmakers and policy decision folks in Texas are, let's be honest, in the pocket of the oil and gas industry, right? And are working in service of the industry and of its proud history of making profits off of Texas natural resources and the people in Texas, right? So some of our lawmakers are using dispatchability as sort of an end run around making life easier for their friends in the fossil fuel industry, right? And harder for renewable energy sources. And the last thing I'll say on this rather technical subject is that there's an easy way to solve all of the problems that wind and solar energy have with dispatchability, and that is batteries, energy storage, right? The wind isn't blowing, but if there's a big battery pack next to the wind turbine that you charge up when the wind is blowing, well, then that resource becomes dispatchable. You just turn the battery on and you get the energy, right? So that's some of the kind of technical side of things, right? We are interested in the demand side. We want investment in people, not energy companies. And we want new technologies like wind, solar, and battery storage to solve this problem of how we get clean, reliable, dispatchable energy. So that's that, and that's all the background, technical stuff. I'm going to move now into the main subject for today, which is the sunset review process. So this is a process in Texas government. It is built into a lot of the agencies that we have created in Texas. The Public Utility Commission is one of these agencies, and we're going to lump in with the PUC, ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, and also the Office of Public Utility Counsel, which is supposed to be an office that helps people interact with PUC, although it generally falls short of that ideal. So the PUC is one of these agencies that's undergoing sunset review. There's about 130 agencies in Texas that undergo sunset review, and they do so on a 12-year cycle. So there is a 2-year process of review, and each 2-year cycle, you've got about 24 agencies that are undergoing review. In this cycle, the Public Utility Commission is one of those agencies. Another one that's very important to me is the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So the sunset review process, right? You got about 22 agencies that undergo sunset review at any given time. And the PUC is one of those agencies in this cycle. So the process has already begun, and it is going to extend all the way through the next legislative session, which will begin in January of 2023. There will be a bill filed that will continue the Public Utility Commission, and that bill will ideally include reforms, improvements to the commission. The Sunset Advisory Commission likes to say that its goal is effectiveness and efficiency of the agency. How well is the agency operating? Is it completing its mission? Does it have the right staff and procedures? So sunset isn't an opportunity for substantive policy changes. So we're not saying to the PUC in the sunset process, I want more solar because it's clean, right? We're saying, I'm not happy with the way that the Public Utility Commission is failing to engage the public and the arcane process that it uses to gather public input when it makes decisions. Process issues is what we're bringing up in sunset, right? So the legislature files the bill. The bill includes reforms, and the bill is passed by the end of the legislative session, and it goes into effect on September 1st of 2023. And then the Public Utility Commission continues for another 12 years, and the whole cycle repeats, right? So that's the end goal of the sunset review process. It is filing and passing legislation that includes positive reforms for the agency that's under review. So what do we do between now and 2023? There's a 3-step process that the Sunset Advisory Commission uses to organize the sunset review of any given agency. When I say the Sunset Advisory Commission, Sunset Commission is itself an agency at the legislature. It is led by a 12-member commission. You've got 5 senators on that commission appointed by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. You've also got a non-senator member appointed by Dan Patrick. And then you've got 5 House of Representatives members appointed by the Speaker of the House, Dave Phelan, and 1 additional non-legislative appointment by Dave Phelan. So you've got a 12-member commission, and then you've got Sunset staff. And I don't know the exact number of Sunset staff. I want to say it's about 30 or so, but don't quote me on that. I'm not sure the exact number. The Sunset staff writes a staff report on the agency, and then the Sunset Commission takes that report and uses it to make formal recommendations to the legislature. So this is a 3-step process, and we are now in step 1, which is the Sunset staff gathering input on the agency and writing its own staff report. Now, there's a spring schedule and there's a fall schedule, and the PUC has been put on the fall schedule for next year, 2022. So the PUC staff, the Sunset staff is going to be doing all of their spring reviews for the next couple of months. And they're going to start publishing staff reports in the spring. They're going to go all the way through about May with those spring reports. And then the Sunset Commission takes over. That's step 2. So step 1 for the PUC will happen in the fall. The Sunset staff will start having meetings with PUC staff. They'll meet with interested members of the public. Right now, that's mostly going to be insiders, right? Generators, people who own gas plants, or retail electric providers, people who sell energy. But we, the advocates at Texas Impact, at Public Citizen, at AARP, and at all of these other groups who have an interest in how the public deals with the Public Utility Commission, we are going to try to get interested members of the public to have these same staff meetings, just like all those insiders are having, right? So trying to open up the process a little bit so that we can get more public input, so that we can actually maybe get some reforms that are good for us, the people, and for our involvement in the process. So that will happen in the fall. And any meetings that we have, any documents that we produce, resources that we provide, that's all off the record. It's behind the scenes material, right? And it's material that ideally influences how the Sunset staff writes its report. The Sunset staff report will come out later in the year in 2022, and then the Sunset Commission will take over. 30 days after the staff report is published, there will be a public hearing. And for the average member of the public, this is going to be their first opportunity to speak up. These are going to be on the record comments that you're giving. If you've ever been to the Texas Legislature, and I know a lot of Texas Impact followers, people who are joining in Weekly Witness, you've been to the Texas Legislature, you've done a hearing, you've spoken in front of a committee. It's going to look just like that, right? The Sunset Commission is going to have public testimony taken in a public hearing that's administered most likely in Austin at the Texas Capitol, probably in person, right? And this is the first big public opportunity. Anything you do here is on the record, right? So you're doing oral testimony, written testimony, just like you would a bill in the legislature. This stuff goes online. It influences the commissioners as the commissioners make their ultimate report to the legislature. And this happens by, December of 22, January of 23 or so. This is step 2, right? The Sunset Commission digesting the staff report, digesting all of the public testimony that's given, and delivering its final report to the legislature. And then that takes us to step 3, which is the legislature takes on, we go through the normal process of filing a bill and passing a bill in 2023 that I just talked about. So that's the Sunset process, basically. And if you're interested in the Public Utility Commission, right now, you would be, if you can, following the market redesign, understanding how it impacts you, learning all of the great jargon that the Public Utility Commission and ERCOT use all the time, terms like distributed energy resources, which just means everything from smart thermostats to solar panels to batteries. Energy efficiency, right, which means can we reduce energy use by cutting waste, right? Distributed generation, which means, all the solar panels that are out there in our communities, right? Things like that. Peak load, right? Which means when does energy use get the highest and how can we reduce it, right? So we're at a unique time right now, which is that, reporters, members of the public, social media, there are conversations happening about all of these technical subjects, right? Because all of this stuff is undergoing an overhaul right now. So as an interested member of the public, your task right now is to understand what's going on. Get a layperson's understanding, right? It's not that you have to become an expert in, some of these really technical aspects. It's that you need to get a layperson's understanding of some admittedly heavy subjects. And you need to understand how those impact you, everything from how reliable your energy is to how big your bill is to, whether or not you will be provided with natural gas and energy during the next electricity crisis, right? So you understand how those things impact you and you build your own story, your own witness, let's call it, to the situation, right? And then when next fall comes around and there actually begin to be sunset opportunities, well, this is a process that has some real public involvement built in, right? There's hearings, there's opportunities for comment, there's opportunities to set up meetings with staff, right? It's a much more open process than the process that we have at the PUC right now. So you understand the PUC process, you learn a little bit more about how it impacts you, you educate yourself about how the conversation is playing out in Texas. And then when the sunset review actually begins in earnest midway through 2022, you are more prepared to participate. And that's when you plug back in with all the advocacy groups. There are all of these great groups out there: Texas Impact, Public Citizen, the Sierra Club, the Energy Foundation, AARP, which is a big consumer rights advocacy group, right? You plug into those groups and their processes, and they are going to help you get into the sunset review process, help you to organize your thoughts, help you to understand what you have to share, what personal experiences of yours are going to be useful in the process to come. So I think that's a pretty good kind of crash course in things. I'm going to look through the outline that was given to me here and see if I haven't answered any of these questions. So just give me a few moments here to look. All right, there's a couple of good questions here. Let me just do a time check real quick. How much time do I have here, Scott, to address these couple of questions?
Take the time you need. Go for it.
All right. So I got about 3 or 4 questions here in my outline. I'm going to go through these one by one. And then are we going to have time, Scott, for Q&A afterwards? Are we able to do that?
We can. If folks have questions, please feel free to post those in the chat.
Let's do that. Yeah, I think we'll have a better conversation if we do have some good Q&A following. I know you're going to do it by text, but if you put them in the chat or in the Q&A, then I will see them. So let me go over a couple of these specific questions. What do we want out of the sunset processes first? The simplest answer is we want more opportunity for public involvement. Public Utility Commission needs to do a better job of being public. The Office of Public Utility Counsel needs to do a better job of engaging the public, right? That means producing materials that aren't jargony, right? Creating natural opportunities for public involvement, allowing the public into the process, because ultimately, and this is the second half answer to the question, what do we want out of the public? We want a Public Utility Commission that actually approaches its mission from the perspective of providing affordable, reliable, resilient energy to people. not just from a perspective of keeping the market open and letting energy markets work for energy sellers and buyers, right? That tends to be how we think about things. And if you followed, for example, the debate over Senate Bill 3 in the legislature and the other major electricity reform bills, it was all about the generators. What are we going to do about the bills that natural gas companies have? What are we going to do about the fact that the wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun goes down at night? What are we going to do about the fact that natural gas didn't seem to produce at the most critical time? All of the focus has been on the big market players, not the customers, the end users. So what do we want? We want a more public process, and we want a utility commission that actually thinks about its public mission, right? Next question. Is there anything we can do about the fact that the natural gas industry got a pass on weatherization? All right, so this was in the media last week. And what happened was the Railroad Commission put out a rule that is supposed to be satisfying its obligation to map out the critical natural gas infrastructure, the wells, pipelines that get the natural gas out there where it needs to be. They were supposed to map that stuff, and then they were supposed to come up with rules to weatherize it so that it will survive the next severe storm. Basically, what happened was the Railroad Commission did not undertake any kind of a mapping. It didn't do any real designation of what's critical and what's not. It said the entire natural gas infrastructure is critical. Everything is critical. Every well, every pipeline, every gathering station, they're all critical. Unless they say they're not. And if a company tells us it's not critical, and it's going to have to file a form, if it files the form, then it's not critical and it's exempt. So you can see this is basically no rule at all, right? Everybody's critical unless they don't want to be. There's no criteria about why you would be critical. There's no criteria for why you wouldn't be critical. There's no requirement to become critical if you're not. It's basically just no rule at all, right? And the reason that they didn't put forth any real significant rule is that the legislature wrote bills that were so broad that they didn't have to. And the Railroad Commission is basically working in service of the natural gas industry, let's be honest here. It didn't have to produce a strong rule, so it didn't, right? Well, legislators got mad about this. They got so mad, there was a hearing last week. They basically told the Railroad Commission that it hadn't done its job at all and it needed to go back to the drawing board. So a lot of us expect that we are going to see a new rule. And we are going to have opportunities to comment on those rules. The current rule is open for comment now through the end of October. Public Citizen has already written some comments. We'll be writing some more. This is fairly technical stuff, but there's also going to be public opportunities. There's going to be sign-on letters. There's going to be email actions to the Railroad Commissioners, basically saying, y'all haven't done your job, right? And you need to do it. So there are opportunities coming. Again, this is going to be an opportunity to, follow groups like Texas Impact, Sierra Club, Public Citizen, who are going to be pushing out opportunities for the public to comment. We do think that this is going to be improved. It's true that the gas industry got a pass. They took advantage of that pass so much that the lawmakers were just flabbergasted, basically, right? So hopefully this gets fixed, and there is opportunity for us to, to comment and fix it.
So we do have a question in the Q&A. You mentioned the Railroad Commission, and, for most Texans, they would think that the Railroad Commission would have something to do with trains, right? But in fact, it doesn't. So the question is, why does the Railroad Commission not want to change their name to the Reliable Energy Commission?
Yeah, the simplest answer is they aren't interested in transparency, right? It's that simple. The Railroad Commission itself went through sunset review, I think 4 years ago, if I remember correctly. And the leading recommendation for reforming the Railroad Commission was to change its name to the Texas Oil and Gas Agency or something like that. I forget the exact name, right? And they said, no, we can't do that. And they gave some nonsense reason about, needing to change stationary and the name being recognizable, blah, blah, blah. It's just not true, right? It is simply put that they do not want to be transparent. They're not interested in the public understanding the agency or what it does, right? They want to operate behind closed doors, again, in service of the oil and gas industry. Let's not mince words here, right? It is about them not being answerable to the public, just like the Public Utility Commission is not especially answerable to the public. Now that takes me to the, go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say, so we're going to have a lot of conversations about this over the course of the next year, preparing for opportunities for public testimony. While we're in this stage now, where we're getting up to speed and learning, do you have resources to direct people to where folks could stay up to date and learn more?
Yeah, good question. We don't have resources specific to this work just yet. And the PUC, especially because it's on the fall sunset schedule, we will not for a while. There is a lot going on with the PUC market redesign right now. There's a lot of messaging being put out on that. I mean, the easiest way is to get plugged into the social media, the email lists, groups of the various organizations that are really deeply involved. So in the case of Public Citizen, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Public Citizen TX or Public Citizen Texas. You can also sign up for email alerts, email actions from Public Citizen and learn more about specific actions that we take from there. And that takes us to the other question that I had in my outline, which was, do public comments actually matter and why? And the answer is yes, depending on when and how they are received, right? So the earlier that you can get involved in the process, the more likely you are to have an impact with your comments. So for example, going back to the 3-step process for Sunset review, if you can talk to Sunset staff and get a recommendation in the staff report, that's fabulous, right? If it's in the staff report, then it's coming from staff, not just the public, right? That's step 1 of the process. Step 2 of the process, if you can say something in public testimony that is compelling to the members of the commission, or if you can find an individual commissioner who is sympathetic to one of your points, and you can get them to make that point, so much the better, right? So for me, it just so happens that the chair of the Sunset Advisory Commission is my senator, Charles Schwartner. Maybe I can leverage my status as a constituent to get in and talk to his people a little bit more closely. Now, they know who I am. They know I work for Public Citizen. They're probably going to ignore me because of that. But, generally speaking, as a constituent, you have a right to go in and talk, right? So maybe one of the commissioners turns out to be your senator or your representative, and you can go talk to them more directly. So the earlier that you can provide comments, the more directed or targeted your comments can be to one of the decision makers, the more impact that you can have, right? So the commission, that's step 2 of the process. You go to step 3 of the process, the legislature, there's still an opportunity to influence the process via some really good testimony at a hearing, or working with a lawmaker to draft an amendment that has a fix to the bill in it, right? But again, it's a question of how specific, how targeted, and at what stage of the process can you get involved. Sunset is the best opportunity we have to reform an agency, and it only comes around once every 12 years. So this is a unique opportunity for us as citizens to influence the operation of the Public Utility Commission. It really is a unique opportunity. It's the best opportunity you're going to get in 12 years. So yes, these comments matter. I see a question or maybe it was a comment in the chat here. A gentleman with 44 years in the electric industry who is making some really solid recommendations, including more ties to the national grid, right? A capacity market that provides short-term backup power, energy efficiency, renewables, nuclear. Jim is thinking about this like somebody who has worked in the energy industry for 44 years is going to think about it, namely that there is no one big single solution to this whole suite of problems. It's going to take a range of approaches and solutions at every step of the process. It's not an either or, a which is the best strategy. It's a little bit of everything, right? If we look at all of the different opportunities that we have out there and employ each of them in appropriate measure, there's going to be some differences. Jim, for example, mentions nuclear power. Public Citizen doesn't personally support any new nuclear generation. We think that there are other ways to make up additional power needs, right? So there are people who are going to have differences on the margin of particular approaches. Energy efficiency. Some people think, 1% energy efficiency goal in just the next year or two is totally reasonable. Some people think we need a slower ramp up to an aggressive energy efficiency goal. So there's disagreements around the margins, but everybody agrees on sort of the basic areas where we need to work. We need to work on demand side strategies. We need to work on dispatchability and reliability on the supply side, right? And it is, how we implement each of these different strategies in what measure, to what effect, to whose benefit, to whose detriment, that will really become, what is done on this problem. So anybody who tells you, hey, this one strategy, let's build 10 natural gas plants, that'll get it done. It's not that simple, right? It's not a one or the other strategy. It's an all of the above kind of thing.
So let me ask a process question. So if we're engaging in steps 1, 2, and eventually 3, do we keep our representatives informed of the work and the comments we're making, even if they're not on the commission? Is there a benefit to having those conversations with them?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The Sunset Advisory Commissioners, right, are the only ones, and the Sunset staff are the only ones who are involved in steps 1 and 2, right? Once you get to step 3, the whole legislature does ultimately have a hand in getting a bill passed, right? So, if your lawmaker isn't on the commission, isn't, really especially versed in these agencies, they don't serve on energy resources, for example, they're not really going to be involved until we get much later on in the process with bills out of committee and on the House floor, So if you're talking to your representative regularly, then yeah, maybe you want to tell them, this is important to me. This is something that I'm going to be working on. You need to pay attention. The Public Utility Commission isn't working for us right now. They need to. I want your support here. Yeah, it's a good thing to tell them about generally, right? But if they're just a rank and file lawmaker, they're not really going to have a role until, let's say April of 2023, right?
Yeah. Well, Adrian, really appreciate the time and information today. This has been great. Any closing thoughts or any shameless plugs you want to leave us with today?
Yeah. First of all, I'm sorry my thoughts are a little scattered there. I hope you followed. I just can't emphasize enough that we are in an extremely unique opportunity here with the PUC market design going on. The public having a general understanding of what ERCOT and the grid are because of what happened in February, and the sunset opportunity that is coming next year. It really is a once in a generation opportunity to seek reform of the energy market here in Texas. So get involved now, right? And then the last thing that I will do, the shameless plug, I do want folks to get connected to Public Citizen. Go to citizen.org/Texas to learn about what we do here in Texas. Find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Public Citizen TX. And the last thing I will say is we've been talking about the Public Utility Commission, but the other big agency that I work on, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, is also going through sunset review, and it is going through it on the spring cycle. So we are meeting with the TCEQ now. So if you are interested in environmental policy and how that impacts your health and well-being and the well-being of Texas, then you need to get involved in the TCEQ sunset process now. And again, the same folks, Texas Impact, Sierra Club, Public Citizen, Environment Texas, Texas Campaign for the Environment. These are the groups who are working on these issues who you should plug into now. So thank you. Always appreciate the opportunity to be here, and we'll do it again sometime, and hopefully it'll be in person.
Yep. Adrian, really appreciate the time. We'll look forward to talking again soon. So it seems like we'll be working on this for a little while. So we'll look forward to having you back. Thanks again.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
So next we will welcome to the conversation Texas Impact's Advocacy Director, Joshua Houston. Josh, thanks for joining.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
So again, as I mentioned at the open, we are 2 weeks into the third called special session. And we've mentioned the last couple of weeks that there were three primary issues that the legislature is going to be considering. We talked about appropriations. We talked about redistricting. We talked about the anti-trans legislation. We're going to add a fourth today to that conversation. But let's just walk through kind of where we are about halfway through the session. I'll note that we're recording this on Tuesday afternoon, October 5th. So as of today, where are we? Let's start with appropriations, because that's a big one that you've been following. So where are we in terms of that legislative funding?
Yeah, there were a number of hearings yesterday, which is part of why we're coming to you on Tuesday and not Monday. We were bouncing between different committee hearings, watching them online all day yesterday. Let's start with the money. In some ways, money is kind of always the most important and also sometimes the most arcane. Senate Finance, which is the Budget Committee in the Senate, they met yesterday on Monday to talk about two bills that involve funding. House Appropriations is meeting tomorrow to talk about similar issues. The bills in Senate Finance that were heard yesterday were left pending. The chair was taking some amendments, but also it's not unusual in the Senate for appropriations bills to be held up in exchange for some sort of grand bargain by the lieutenant governor with his other counterparts in the House and also the governor's office. Watch that development. That is kind of be unusual if it didn't get held up as part of some sort of grand bargain. It's just too big a bargaining chip to be resisted. Over on the House side, they're going to be meeting tomorrow, although that is highly likely to get drowned out in the news cycle. Because, and we'll talk more about this in a second, but because of redistricting and then the anti-trans bill, the trans sports bill will be getting a hearing tomorrow, and that will consume a good amount of the media cycle's oxygen. So no surprises yet on those appropriations bills. You have to watch them like a hawk, though.
All right, so the fourth issue, which we'll cover second, is one that we didn't originally talk about coming into the session. And I guess I'll ask if there's a bill associated or if there's just a series of hearings. But a lot of noise, a lot of hearings about the situation at the border. So what updates do we need there?
Yeah, almost daily. There's some committee hearing some aspect about the situation down there. Some of that's because the speaker has included interim charges to the committees, and some of it's just the committees want to hear about it and want to at least look like they're doing oversights. So it was in the call in the second special, now being the third, where we tripled the amount of money going to law enforcement operations on the Texas-Mexico border. To $3 billion, which is a tripling of previous levels, which was at $1 billion. And like I said, there have been hearings almost daily. I think the news that we should talk about now a little bit, and it came out in the committee hearing yesterday in House Criminal Jurisprudence, it appears to be a bit of an implementation nightmare in some of these smaller counties where DPS, which is the state, is down there doing joint operations with Border Patrol, which is federal. And then there's a question of if we're arresting people for trespass, which is a state charge, a low-level misdemeanor charge, do we house them in county jails? When the county jails get full, where do you put people? We have reopened 3 prisons. And let decommissioned prisons that have been reopened and given to private contractors as part of that border security money. So in the news cycle, there were over 200 migrants that had been held for weeks without bond, without a hearing, without access to counsel. All of those things violate both the state and federal constitutions. When the news broke, They were released almost immediately. They did not all necessarily get released to freedom. Many of them had what are ICE detainers, which are immigration detainers, where they then went into federal custody. But nevertheless, this is a space to watch where the state of Texas is violating basic constitutional norms down on the Texas-Mexico border. In fact, more even came out in committee than was reported in the press. The lawyer who's representing some of the migrants testified that, and she did not know if it was DPS or Border Patrol because it was a joint operation. So it could have been either one. They're working together in joint operations. But one of the things they will do is they will lure migrants onto private property off of the public road. And they do that so that they can then make an arrest for criminal trespass. Again, many times you can think, well, did they climb a fence? No, sometimes there's no fence. They just walked onto private property with very little notice that it was private property. And there may not have even been a sign or even anything to indicate that that was the case. This is concerning. This is a concerning law enforcement practice. It's a concerning for due process. It's concerning for our constitutional norms and our norms under criminal law.
So these are just hearings. There's no bill, right? So there's no,
not so far.
There's no action folks need to be taking right now, but more of a, hey, we're learning a lot. Stay tuned. Watch this space.
There are bills that have been filed. There are always bills that get filed in a special session. The question is, do they make it onto the call? Right now, no. Right now, there's not much on the call that could be moved. It is more, it's more of a hearing opportunity for legislators, monitoring oversight. There's not active legislation. The thing to watch is the implementation, the thing that the executive branch is doing. And there may be some oversight from the legislature, but the lack of accountability from the legislature when it comes to constitutional norms.
So last Monday when we talked, the Senate had released their Senate maps for redistricting. The congressional maps had come out, I think, a few minutes before we went on air. And yesterday, we're recording on Tuesday. So Monday, the House began a hearing looking at their maps. So where are we in terms of redistricting? I expect this is something we'll be hearing a lot more about over the course of the next few days.
Yeah, let's talk process. And then I'm going to talk about kind of some racial demographics. I'm talking about some partisan demographics. And then I want to talk about, most importantly, I want to talk about what it means for communities. So in the process, the Senate yesterday passed both the congressional maps and the state Senate maps. The House had a hearing yesterday. It just resumed at 1 o'clock today. There are already a couple of changes I noted. So the House map is a bit dynamic as we speak. It's always the most complicated with the 150 members in the county line rule. So there's some changes are underway. But nevertheless, it appears to be on a fast track to try to get it done by the end of this week. Whether they achieve that or not, we'll have to wait and see. That is taking the attention of almost every legislator. That is existential for each legislator, and really preoccupies their mind away from things policy. I want to go through kind of a high level of data on where we're at. Most of this you can read in the news, but it is worth talking about. Let's talk about what the proposed maps as they currently are on this date, October 5th. As they currently are, what does it mean? So since 2010, it is now 2021. Since the 2010 census, Texas has gained 4 million new Texans. We went from about 25 million to 29 million. Of those 4 million people, 95% of them are persons of color. So 19 out of every 20 new Texans is Black, Hispanic, or Asian. 1 out of every 20 is white. Hispanics have reached a parity with Anglos. Anglos are 39.8%. Hispanics are 39.3%. They are essentially at parity now. So with 60% of Texas being a person of color, in the congressional maps, more than 50% of those congressional maps are majority white. Over in the Senate maps, the state Senate has 31 seats. 16 of them, so a majority, are majority white districts that have a majority white voting age population. Only 7 of them are Hispanic, so 16 to 7, even though we just talked about how Hispanics and Anglos were at parity. In the House, State House, you have 6 fewer seats drawn for Black or Hispanic people. This is not representation. This will be where most of the conversation occurs in the courts in the coming months, because it will certainly go to court. The reason for that is because I think it was last year, at least in the last 2 years, the U.S. Supreme Court has said, if it's partisan gerrymandering, we're not going to look at it. If it's racial gerrymandering, then we will look at it. Therefore, the conversation will be about whether or not this is or isn't racial gerrymandering. Is it? Well, that's for a court to decide, but based on math, 95% of the growth is people of color, and the number of seats representing persons of color is decreasing in all 3 maps. It's just math. We'll see what a federal court thinks about that, but common sense and mathematics would say that they are discriminatory. Let's talk about it from a partisan perspective. So in 2020, President Donald J. Trump won Texas. Of course, he lost the election to President Biden, but he won the state of Texas 52-46. 52% of the vote to 46% of the vote. So that's the makeup of the state, 52-46, pretty close in 2018 as well. But if you look at the number of Senate districts in the state Senate, it's 61-38 if you were going to make it a percentage. What that means in real numbers is there's 19 seats for Republicans, 12 seats for Democrats. If it was reflective of the statewide vote and you it's a rounding error, it's either 16-15, or if you make it rounded for Republicans, 17-14. So there's 2 extra seats drawn and gerrymandered to be Republican districts, then would conform to the statewide average. In the House, it's a little closer. It's 57-43. Of course, 57-43 is not 52-46. But it's at least in the ballpark. It's only drawing 2 new Republican seats, in theory at least. It's currently 83-67. They're drawing at 85-65. Some of that's the county line rule, but from a partisan perspective, it is, again, not representative of the people of Texas. But I want to spend a moment talking about communities. There is a term of art, it's a term of art in redistricting called a community of interest. So it's not a term we're just throwing about willy-nilly. A community of interest is a term that is meant to be, does the district, the makeup of a district, represent a community that shares an interest? And I want to spend some time on this concept because I think this is the most important part. There's going to be all this talk about race. There will be the color commentary about the parties, but I do not want people to lose sight of what we think is the most important thing, and that's, do the districts represent communities, the communities that you and I live in? The interests that we share with each other in these communities. And to illustrate this, I want to talk about Dallas County, a county where I grew up, so I know it well. And I want to use a story, I want to use anecdote to talk about the fact that the answer to this question is no, it doesn't reflect communities of interest. So 2 cycles ago, 2009, I worked for a state representative for the district that I grew up in. My grandparents lived there. My parents still live there. My grandparents still live there. My aunt lives there. I went to high school there. I lived there from the time I was born until I got out of higher education. And I spent a bit of time in higher ed. So you could 18 solid years and really probably 25 years if you kind of go through my educational history. I lived there a long time. I have deep ties to my family that lives there. It used to represent, the district used to have the entirety of the city of Mesquite and then parts of Sunnyvale, Balch Springs. That made sense because the ISD lines were either the same, or at that time, Sunnyvale didn't have a high school. We all fed it in Mesquite. It has a high school now, but it was a community. It reflected Mesquite, frankly. That was the old district lines. That district does not exist anymore. In fact, now there are 6 different districts that we're about to talk about. Now, if my dad drives from his house to the 7-Eleven, the nearest 7-Eleven, the 7-Eleven he's gone to for 25 years, he crosses 2 districts. If he then decides, hey, I want some donuts, and literally if he crosses the street to the donut shop, he's now gone 3 districts. If I were to drive to my high school, the drive I took every morning for 4 years, there's 4 stoplights, and I crossed 3 house districts. If I go to my aunt's house, and she lived 1 neighborhood over from my grandparents, 1 neighborhood over from my high school, but of course it went to the same high school, fed into the same high school. Still 4 lights, but now we've crossed into 4 house districts. If I were to drive to my church that I grew up in from the cradle, I would cross 6 house districts. All of this is in the eastern part of Dallas County. The Mesquite Independent School District is now represented by 6 different state representatives. It has been chopped up into 6 state house districts, one small suburb of Dallas. You can say, well, Mesquite ISD has more representation, right? No, their vote's been diluted. In none of those house districts does Mesquite represent a majority of any of those house districts. They are going to be chopped up in a minority of all 6 of those districts. To give you some idea of quite how ridiculous one of them is, there's a community called Cockrell Hill in the far western part of the district. I'm sure it's a fine community. I just wouldn't know. I've never set foot there. In the 18 years I lived there, 25 years I lived there, however you want to count it, I never had reason to go to the southwestern part of the county because I lived in the far eastern part of the county. And yet they are now in 1 district. A baseball field that I played Little League on is in the eastern part of the county, and this community that I have never been to is in the western part of the county. It's a 35-minute drive if I were to ever try to go there from my house. And that's assuming there's no traffic. And it's Dallas. It's very urban. All of this is a highly urban neighborhood. Could take me an hour and a half to get there in traffic easily, maybe 2 hours. This is not representation for either Cockrell Hill or for the part of Mesquite in the eastern part of the county. That's not fair. They do not share a community of interest. Dallas County looks like spaghetti. So that gives you an idea of so if I'm a parent and I'm sending my kid to a Mesquite school, in 1 high school alone, there could be 4 different state reps with children that go to that high school. In the ISD, there's 6. There's 5 high schools in that ISD. That is not reflective of a community of interest.
And not just happening in Dallas either, right? Like that's the principle we're saying.
No, that is one small example. It is just one that I knew very well.
Yep.
To reflect what's going on all over the place. Yeah. Whether it be Collin County or any, you can just look. Some are more reflective of the community than others, but the urban areas especially are getting really chopped up.
So we'll hear about that in the news over the course of the next few days, and I'm sure we'll have an update soon. But one area where for sure we are pushing people to get involved in the next 24 hours, again, recording Tuesday afternoon, is the anti-trans bill that we've talked about really all year, right? Like this is the fourth effort to try to pass this ban on kids playing sports. So a little frustrating. You and I were talking, and I guess I'll own this comment, that it's a little frustrating that this hearing got scheduled for tomorrow at 11 o'clock and was posted today at 11 o'clock. So not a lot of time for folks to organize. But where are we on the anti-trans legislation?
Yeah, I mean, in a special session, the House rules require only 24 hours notice, and it appears to be exactly 24 hours notice, maybe 24 hours and 1 minute. I'd have to check the timestamp with the committee coordinator. I'm sure somebody will. But yeah, it was a bare minimum of notice. They are really, the only reason to do that is if you really don't want turnout. Here we are yet again. What the bill does is it requires a child to compete on the sports team assigned that corresponds with the gender that was assigned to that child at that child's birth. This is not a problem in Texas. There are no documented cases of this being a problem in Texas. Texas already has a rule on this. It was done at the UIL, the agency that does sports across the state. The UIL rule seems to be working. Again, not a problem. This is a question for medical science. It is not a question for the legislature. It is best handled by medical science. This is getting into some really scientific stuff that is relatively cutting edge and new. Again, we have no evidence of a problem in Texas, and yet for the fourth time in, I guess it's October, so technically 10 months, but really things don't get moving until March, so 7 months, I guess. Here we are again. This time, it's not in the Public Education Committee. It is in a relatively new committee. It is the House Committee on Constitutional Rights and Remedies. It was created in the special sessions. You may remember this committee because it was the committee that heard SB 1, the voting rights bill, the voter suppression bill, we should say, that did ultimately pass. It has been created to move controversial bills based on just evidence. It's very much a speaker's committee, frankly. I mean, the speaker created it, as the speaker has the power to do. It has been where most of the controversial bills have been sent. It has been stacked with members that would be considered part of the speaker's team by and large. It has had a fairly early hearing. There are still 2 weeks to go in a special session. October 20th is the last day of this special session, so we still have 15 days. We do not know, but it is possible that this bill is tied to some sort of deal. Big deals between the big three are routine and par for the course. It'd be weird if there wasn't one. Is it tied to a deal on redistricting? Is it tied to getting those maps through? Is it tied to a deal on appropriations? Really don't know. All things we're watching. But we're kind of in real trouble given how early this is getting a hearing, how fast the deadlines, things can move, how loose the deadlines are in a special session. There's really only one option at this point for advocates, and that is to get really loud yet again. We need you to call. We need you to call the committee members. We need you to, if at all possible, get down to Austin tomorrow to register a position. There's a great video that Scott linked to in a rapid response email that can show you how to do that without ever having to actually enter the building. You have to be on the Capitol's Wi-Fi. The good news is the Wi-Fi, you can usually access it just outside the granite walls of the Capitol if you're afraid to go in. Also, it's a pretty big, spacious building. If you put on a mask and have been vaccinated, you should be fine. If at all possible, we want you to register a position against the bill. If at all possible, we would like for you to testify too. There's nothing to do but to get really loud and stand up and bear prophetic witness that we're not going to continue to use kids who are trans and identify as trans as a political football. We have drugged them through the mud this session enough times, but then we just keep dragging them through the mud when you think about the bathroom bill in 2017. A very misunderstood community that we continue to pick on for political gain, and it's just wrong to pick on anybody for political gain.
And we've talked about it a couple of times over the course of the last few weeks since the end of the regular session and again in the specials. It's especially important for Texans of faith to register your opposition to this, to speak out against this, to make your telephone calls, to be vocal, in part because these bills are being pushed by a small sliver of evangelical Christians and or others. And so the main line in interfaith communities in Texas, faith communities in Texas, have to speak out and say, you are not representing us. We are opposed to discrimination. And that should be something that we're all comfortable saying. But again, to echo what Josh says, you've got a couple of things you can do by Wednesday, October 6th. Show up at the Capitol and testify. Register your opposition from the parking lot or outside the building, or make telephone calls. And the telephone calls are linked at in the TexasImpact.org Action Center. You can find the toll-free numbers for all of the committee members on there. I hope you'll spend some time today or tomorrow making those calls so they hear from you. But also talk to your friends in or around Austin. I recognize if you're listening from like Lubbock or El Paso or somewhere else, you might not be able to make it to the Capitol tomorrow, but you might have friends in Austin who can, or any of the surrounding areas. So make those telephone calls and see if you can get some friends to go represent you in those hearings. Josh, anything else to add today? All right. Friends, I really do appreciate you taking the time today. Josh, thank you for tuning in. Really appreciated Adrian taking the time earlier in the episode. But if you stayed with us this long, please make sure that you share this content with your friends and congregations, and make sure to leave a rating or review. Josh, we want good ratings, right?
Of course.
The highest rating you can give. And consider leaving a review. At some point, we'll read some of those on air. And remember to keep an eye on Texas Impact's social media for upcoming announcements. If you have questions about anything we've covered today, you can reach out to me at scott@texasimpact.org. And remember, if you support Texas Impact and the Weekly Witness community, please make sure that you and your friends and congregations are members by going to texasimpact.org/join. Friends, there's a lot going on. It feels like every week we say these are unprecedented times, and I think it's still true. But in this world, in these times, Texas needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.